I have been doing a bit of a thought experiment over the last couple of days, and I would like to invite you to do that one again with me here in this room. I think that most of you will actually be able to do this with your eyes closed, because what I will talk about is very familiar to most of us. But still, I have some visual aids above as well. I want us to imagine a world where Google Maps, as we know it, is really, really bad. A world where Google Maps sucks. I took the screenshot from a browser. I'm not going to say which one. And you can see on the left-hand side that you've got this lovely box. We see the city of Tartu, of course. And you can see in this lovely box on the left-hand side some information about the city. You can see something about the history, for example, some of the biggest sites that you should really see if you're in town. So all of these things you can see in that left-hand box. Imagine if that box no longer existed. Imagine also that this small box on the top side with the recommendations for the best grocery shopping, the best restaurants, the best hotels, petrol stations, all of these things that we use every single day. Imagine that that box too would be gone. Imagine now that arguably the core of everything Google, the search bar, would no longer exist. And now think about this. Even there on the top left corner, you can still see the weather, and it will also tell you some traffic recommendations, because arguably you should find the fastest way of getting to your desired location. Imagine also if that did not exist. You think we're done now, aren't you? We're not. Because still on the screen you see all of these lovely logos and buttons for the university clinic. You see maybe the nicest church in town that you should go to. Maybe there's a shopping center. You can see the university as well. Imagine if the road names, imagine if these tags did not exist. And now imagine that this version of Google Maps, which is arguably really, really bad, imagine if this version of Google Maps was only open Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 p.m. Imagine how bad that would be, you know. And the question that I asked myself, and that I also encourage you to ask yourselves, is if this was the situation that Google Maps was in, would you still use Google Maps? Would you use this, what's effectively a virtual image of a map where you have to zoom in and out, you don't get recommendations, you don't have a search bar, you don't have any of that? Would you still use Google Maps? And I think the answer for most of us is going to be no. And this brings me to the leading question for my talk today, which is a very simple one that Estonians don't have to worry about so much, but many other people around the world do. If we would never accept, under any circumstances, such a bad quality from Google Maps, then why do we accept the same level of service from governments every single day? As was said in the introduction, I am German. I come from a country where founding a company takes 1 month and 20 pages of paper. So this is the level that most countries are at. So why do we accept things like this? This seems absurd, right, to the average Estonian. This is something that most American citizens will have seen in their lives. It's the very creatively called Form 1040. It's the start to their tax declaration that they get to fill out every single year. And in that tax declaration, not only do they get to fill out, where they work, they also get to fill out every single time their name, their address, their birthday, and so on. So all of this stuff you have to enter again and again and again, not just for services in different government authorities, but even with the same authority if you have to fill in 3 separate forms for one reason or another. So the question that I keep coming back to is, why do we accept this level of service quality from the government? Because you will always be their customer. This is the one big difference between the private and the public sector. The private sector has to compete with other companies. If Google Maps continues to be really, really bad for years, odds are that you will switch to Bing Maps. Now, this has not happened for many reasons, but that's another point for another time. But with companies, you have to compete with one another, and the one that continues to provide the best service is usually the one where most people end up using the services. For the country level, that is not really the same way, because if you are born in the United States, if you are born in Germany, what are the odds that you leave that country because the tax declaration is on paper? Very low. Yeah. So you may leave because you don't like the weather. You may move to Estonia for that purpose. You may leave for economic opportunities. You may leave because you found your loved one abroad. And that's all perfectly valid. But most of us do not leave because the government service level is so bad. Now, there is, of course, and many people here in this room know this, but those people watching from abroad do not, there is another way. In Estonia, for example, things I would personally say are very different. In Estonia, you do your tax declaration on an average in 3 minutes. And last year, 98.7% of income tax declarations were filed online. That is not a coincidence, because it is so damn easy. In Estonia, you can create a company in 20 minutes completely online. Last year, I bought a plot of land digitally without ever having physically met the person that sold me that piece of land. That is unbelievable. And so if it is unbelievable, we have to ask the question, how did Estonia do that? Probably even many Estonians don't really know where all of this digital stuff came from and why it is here today and why it's, comparably speaking, so good. So let's talk about why. First of all, true story, Estonia was poor. I used 3 different fonts for this slide for a very, very simple reason. We've got Estonia in font 20, you've got was in font 40, and you've got poor in font 160. From 1990 to 2020, 30 years time span, most countries have doubled their GDP per capita, the sort of value that people on average create in this country. Most established economies have doubled that value over 30 years. For example, Germany. So they went from font 20 to font 40. Estonia, in the same way, in the same time span, did not double, did not quadruple. It multiplied the value created on average 8 times over. This is a very polite way of saying that back then Estonia was 8 times poorer than it is today. And so this poverty was really important because Estonia simply couldn't afford to build up physical government infrastructure in every single village, in every single piece of land around the country. And so that was a real challenge. Another challenge, and you also know this, is that Estonia was and still is very, very empty. Again, you see the difference in font size. Again, it's 20, and again, it's 160. Why is it the case this time? Because if we take the comparison of Germany and Estonia, in Germany, there are around 230 people living per square kilometer. 230. And in Estonia, that number is 29. What I'm trying to say is that in the 2 biggest cities of the country, 1/3 of the population live. And the rest is spread, and you know this very well, across a myriad of forests and bogs and islands and beaches in small villages. Estonians know the location of villages with a population of 500 people because that's like the 10th biggest city here. So, Estonia had that challenge as well. It was not just the financial aspect, it was also that you didn't even have the people to staff the buildings with that would work for the public sector. And so that was also a problem. And the third problem that I would point out is Estonia is a country with a post-Soviet experience, whether we like it or not. And as part of that system, corruption was rampant, not just here, but also elsewhere. And the reason for that is that there's always a human being in the government agency that sits between the person, the citizen, and on the other side, the service that they're trying to get done. And if you want to speed up the way in which it is being done, then what do? You pay someone. That is corruption. And obviously, people lose money through that as well. But this is where Estonia made a very important choice. Digitalization, they realized, solves all three of these really core critical problems. It means that, number one, yes, you have to invest in digital infrastructure, and you have to keep investing over time, but you will probably also get a lot of savings through that. Also, the second problem, the emptiness of Estonia. You can use any government service that you think of. 99% of government services are accessible online in Estonia. You can do that from anywhere in the world, not just in Estonia, but everywhere in the world, as long as you're connected to the internet. Right? So it is not about emptiness or big cities or anything like that anymore. And last but not least, digitalization, in most cases, removes the intermediary, the person that sits between you and the service that you want to get done. And so this is really exciting because this is sort of a big word. We stand at the dawn of a new era, and in a way we do. But the more important thing for me is that this technology that we use in Estonia is not unique to Estonia. We have smart programmers, smart developers, user interface designers, cybersecurity specialists all around the world. This knowledge exists. People have the internet. So this is no longer a question of capability, but it's rather one of mindset. And I want to run you through 3 very quick points of why we should develop that digital mindset together and why it is a bit silly for us to develop it separately from one another. We should be in a network. We should be talking about these things together across boundaries and borders. With working together, I mean a very simple example. In Estonia, we have a digital prescription. So when you need prescription medicine, you get that connected to your electronic identity, which is compulsory in Estonia. You go to any pharmacy in the country, and then you get your prescription medicine. And then they also calculate how much the government covers of that cost, and so on. To most people around the world, that is science fiction. In Germany, we have paper prescriptions to this day. And even if it was digital, which it is not, I cannot go with my Estonian ID card to Germany if I visit my friends and family, forget my prescription medicine back home here in Estonia, and just show up with my Estonian ID card at a German pharmacy. They would be like, was ist das? Nein? What do I do with this? You know. So even if you had these 2 digital systems, in most cases we don't have what we call interoperability. The systems usually cannot talk to each other. And that is why we need to talk jointly about these developments across borders as well. Another aspect for me is security. So the thing is that when we talk about digitalization, the people that want to mention the topic security are usually the ones that say, aha, but now your data can get hacked. True. But you can also copy data on paper. And you don't know if another doctor looks at your medical data on paper in a folder at a hospital. You don't have any insight into that. I want to talk about cybersecurity from a positive angle. In Estonia, we are the first country in the world that has something called a data embassy. That is effectively a big group of backup servers, sort of databases, that are not in Estonia. And they hold the most critical data sets, for example, who owns which piece of land in Estonia. That's really important data that you shouldn't be able to mess with so quickly and easily. So this data embassy exists in Luxembourg, and it has several purposes. It can, for example, secure your data from physical attacks on Estonia. You know, if the servers are under physical attack, you have a problem, and the data embassy solves that. We also have many other countries around the world that struggle with environmental disasters. If your island in the Caribbean is right on the path of Hurricane Alley, you have a problem, right? And so having that data duplicated somewhere else, you know, physically speaking, is a good thing to make sure that your country continues to run properly. And last but not least, and this is something where we can draw the connection with the public and the private sector again. If we think about social networks, I can get in touch with someone from Korea, with someone from Thailand in a minute. You know, we've got something like Facebook. We've got something like Google. If I want to buy something from around the world, I can also do that. There are things like Amazon and so on. So why can't I just be a citizen of another country like that? Why can't I be a digital citizen? Well, Estonia thought about that question as well. And there is something called e-residency since 2014. And now there are almost 100,000 e-residents around the world that don't get physical access to the country, they don't get actual citizenship, they don't get the right to vote, but they can get this electronic identity just like we do, and they can use all of the same services online. For example, they can create a company online and run that business from around the world. Last year, 1/3 of all newly created companies were not created by Estonians, but by foreigners somewhere around the world through e-residency. And needless to say that obviously this is also good for the tax income in Estonia. So nothing to complain about really. And this brings me to my final point. The good and the bad news really is that this development is in our hands and it is in your hands as well. Because we need to push the decision makers around the world to follow this roadmap, to discuss a shared journey towards more digitalization. If we ever want to live in a world where I can go to any country in the world and I can forget my prescription medicine and I can just pop up at any local pharmacy in Thailand and I can just get my prescription medicine, wouldn't that be awesome? It would be. But this can only happen if we talk more to each other and also if we change our political priorities and preferences. You know, in elections, usually people focus on things like defense or education or taxes. We used to treat digitalization as a separate topic. This is something that the nerds do. We need to see digitalization as an integral part to every of these topics that I just mentioned. You can strengthen education through digitalization. We've seen that during times of COVID. You can strengthen security, also physical security, through digitalization. You can certainly streamline your tax system as well. So it is time for us to push our politicians more in that direction and to demand that whatever topic they are talking about, that they keep in mind the merits of digitalization and that they keep talking about it together with other people around the world. Thank you so much.